Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live edition of Double Crossed Radio. And I'm here on time this week. Last week was a little chaotic. I apologize a little bit to any stress I may have caused Jules or the other people at UCY. And really appreciate my audience sticking around. And I very much want to have a huge thank you to Drew for my computer just died minutes before we were going, and I rebooted it, and it was coming back on, but it's just really slow, the one I was using at work. And so it was so that my guest that I was going to have on ended up introducing the show and waiting for me to get online and get connected, and what a mess. But it worked out, and boy, it was certainly good to have Drew on again. I can't tell you how much I missed doing the show with him, but he has a lot of other things he's doing, and when he's able to talk a little bit about some of those things, and it's pretty evident that he's in the right spot. And it's also evident that at some point in time, when things slow down a little bit for him, that he may be here again for some more shows, and he might be on every couple months or so, also when he has something to share with us. But I enjoyed last week's show just because it was fun to talk with him again. He's really a stimulating conversationalist, and he's got a lot of things that just make new thoughts in my head. Anyway, tonight's show, I'm just going to get right into it. I'm not sure how long all this talking is going to last. If it doesn't, I'll get into current events or something. But sometimes I just get to talking, and all of a sudden I've only gone through about a page or two, and I've got about 20 pages here of stuff to go through. So let's just get after it. This is from an article. I'm going to pick this story up kind of in mid-sense. I don't want to give out too much information because it'll ruin the surprise effect that I have coming up soon. A police dog scratched at your luggage, so we're confiscating your life savings and you'll never get it back. Police had stopped 49-year-old Ethel Hilton at Houston's Hobby Airport and told her she was under arrest because a drug dog had scratched at her luggage. Agents searched her bags and strip searched her, and they found no drugs. They did find $39,110 in cash she had received from an insurance settlement, and her life savings accumulated by working as a hotel housekeeper and hospital janitor for more than 20 years. Ethel Hilton, and that's Hylton, completely documented where she got the money and was never charged with the crime. However, the police kept her money. Nearly 4 years later, well, this is actually later than that now, but she's still trying to get her money back. She's just one of a growing list of Americans, now numbering in the hundreds of thousands, who have been victimized by civil asset forfeiture. Under civil asset forfeiture, everything you own can be legally taken away from you without indictment, trial, or conviction. Suspicion of offenses, which, if proven, might result in a $200 fine or probation, are being used to justify seizures of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property. Thousands of innocent Americans are losing their cars, homes, bank accounts, businesses, based upon the claims of unidentified informants that illegal transactions took place on their property. 30-year-old Ken Brown owned and operated Chemco, a small pool and gardening chemical supply company in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A few months after he opened his doors, agents of the Drug Enforcement Administration stopped by and told him to get out of the chemical business. A year later, Ken found out why. His chief competitor in Albuquerque had an arrangement with the DEA, and neither the DEA nor the competitor wanted any competition. When Ken refused to close his doors in 1987, harassment from the DEA began and got steadily worse. First, his UPS packages were opened and inspected. Then his deliveries were seized, his drivers were searched, and his suppliers were threatened. Next, his house was searched by armed DEA agents. They found nothing. Then one day, the DEA arrested his manager and padlocked the doors to Chemco. The IRS was also brought in to investigate the company. The DEA charged Chemco with selling chemicals that could be used to manufacture drugs. On May 8th, I don't want to say this date here. Then later that year, this is in the following year, the DEA seized Ken Brown's house and cars and told him to sign an agreement to pay rent to the U.S. Marshals or hit the street with his wife and 8-year-old son. The DEA made Ken Brown an offer. Give us Chemco and we will give you all your personal belongings back. Ken Brown refused and is still fighting. Dr. Jonathan Wright operated Tacoma Medical Clinic in Kent, Washington. One day, nearly 24 armed police, Food and Drug Administration agents broke down his clinic's doors and pointed their weapons at him and his 15-person staff, mostly women. For the next 14 hours, the staff was held at gunpoint while the FDA ransacked the clinic. Neither Dr. Wright nor any of his employees was ever charged with the crime. That didn't stop the police and the FDA from seizing Dr. Wright's books, laboratory equipment, supplies, patient records, reference books, and computers. The raid was part of a national FDA crackdown on nutritional therapists. Just enforcing those laws. Don't want anything illegal going on. Willie Jones owned a small landscaping service in Nashville, Tennessee. When he paid cash for an airline ticket at Nashville Metro Airport one February day, the ticket agent acted strangely and said she would have to check in back what to do with the cash. The ticket agent returned and gave Mr. Jones his ticket. 10 minutes later, drug agents stopped and searched him. They found $9,600 in cash, which Jones was going to use to buy plants for his business. Jones explained he pays in cash because that's the way the growers want it. He didn't want to stop DEA from taking his money. Or that didn't stop DEA from taking his money, excuse me. Jones was not charged with any crime, but the government took all of his operating cash and nearly put him out of business. Legal rights and protections that Americans have cherished for hundreds of years have been increasingly violated during the last several decades. Most of what you learn in school about your legal rights and protections is no longer true. Okay, let's go back and view the history of civil asset forfeiture. The seeds of this social disaster were planted in the 1970s when Congress enacted the Federal Racketeering and Corruption Influence Statutes, RICO, greatly expanded in 1984. Although the rhetoric supporting RICO focused upon defeating organized crime, the actual crimes targeted by RICO were rather vague. To be cited under RICO, all a person or firm needed to be suspected of are 2 instances of mail wire or securities fraud. Fraud is so broadly defined by RICO that the law covers virtually any offense involving mail, telephone, or stocks. Far from being limited to going after organized crime, RICO is now invoked in minor business cases, landlord-tenant disputes, anti-abortion protests, and even divorce cases. Okay, now these first stories that I cited or started the show off with, these 2 stories happened in the early 1990s. That was over 20 years ago. And I just want to know, what are we doing as Americans? We let this continue on, and we didn't stand up for Ethel Hilton, and we didn't stand up for Ken Brown, and we didn't stand up for Jonathan Wright, and we didn't stand up for Willie Jones. And so now we have a situation where the government has reached a point, and I'm gonna have to I've got to find the right page here so I can get my notes out here. It's reached a point where the total losses due to criminal theft, that's, things getting stolen from you by criminals, and I'm not meaning taxes, but the total losses due to criminal theft are less than the losses from unjust civil forfeitures on an annual basis, every year. So our government is a bigger threat to our assets, our property, the things that they're supposed to protect. They're a bigger threat to those things than the organized crime. That these statutes were set out to help rein in, I guess, be the only word you could use. Now, once we let go of one of our rights, one of our precious constitutional natural rights, and then these aren't granted to us by the Constitution. The Constitution ensures that government cannot infringe upon these natural rights. These are rights that you have the moment you were born, no matter where you are in the world. It isn't unique to America, but it's what made America unique is that its government was prohibited from infringing on those rights. But in the United States today, once you say, well, no, we want to give this natural right away because we think it will help society, because it's going to help us to rein in organized crime. And you see what starts to happen. And this is almost within a few years of it happening. In 1974, this is only 4 years after this started, the Supreme Court issued a landmark civil seizure decision. Now, for it to get to the Supreme Court, this had to have happened almost immediately after they enacted this law. A $20,000 yacht owned by Pearson Yacht Leasing was seized by and forfeited to the Customs Service in Puerto Rico. It seems that a group renting the yacht from Pearson used it to transport marijuana totally without Pearson's knowledge or consent. There was no judicial hearing prior to the seizure, nor was Pearson given any advance notice of the seizure. In the court, U.S. authorities admitted that Pearson was neither involved in nor aware of any illegal activity on board the yacht while it was being rented. Still, the Supreme Court, and that is really an oxymoron, held in an 8-1 decision that the yacht could be seized and forfeited anyway because the owner had not proven that he had done all that reasonably could be expected to prevent the prescribed use of his property. The court did not specify what Pearson would have to do to protect his property from seizure because of activities of parties over whom he had no control, but he had to lose this in 1973 dollars, 20,000 yachts got to be like a $200,000 yacht today. But it was a pretty big boat. And, you know, it was almost from the initial inception of this act that it had been abused. And it's just gotten worse. Mark and Kathy Schramma of New Jersey found out just how destructive and uncontrolled government seizure power now is. The police arrested the Schrammas just a few weeks before Christmas in 1990 at their home in New Jersey. Kathy was charged with taking a few UPS packages from neighbors' porches. Mark was charged with receiving stolen goods. They had never been previously convicted of any crime. Now, these people are not somebody that we're going to look up to or glorify because they're kind of scummy to steal UPS packages in the days leading up to Christmas. But, you know, maybe Kathy's kind of got some kind of a psychological problem. Who knows? If found guilty in criminal court, they could expect to pay a small fine and possibly receive probation. But the day after they were arrested, before there was any indictment or trial, before even a seizure warrant was issued, their house, cars, possessions were all seized by New Jersey police for the alleged theft of $500 worth of packages. Over $150,000 in property was seized from Kathy and Mark. Virtually everything they owned. Police even took their clothes, prescription medicines, eyeglasses, and Christmas presents for their 10-year-old son. And I don't know if those were presents they had purchased or stolen. The point is, there was no trial. This was all taken before they were tried. In December 1988, Detroit police raided a grocery store to make a drug arrest, failed to find any drugs. After police dogs reacted to 3 $1 bills in the cash register, the police seized the entire contents of the cash register and a safe totaling $4,384. That's probably, I don't know how big the grocery store, that probably is like the previous day's deposit. According to a 7-year study, or it could have been drops that the cash registers were making during the day. I don't know what time it was that they made this this quote-unquote bust. According to a 7-year study by the Toxicology Consultants Incorporated, an average of 96% of all currency that they analyzed from 11 cities tested positive for cocaine. If a drug residue is all that necessary for a police to seize cash, most of the currency in the United States could be seized tomorrow, or at least 96% of it. And I think if you have currencies that is mingling with with currencies that have been, could be test positive for cocaine. If you had a clean bill that's mixing with one that's laced with cocaine, then it's probably that would just be considered. It would need to be confiscated as well. So, I think it probably means that just about every Federal Reserve note could be taken. In December 1983, Mary and Carl Sheldon learned through a local newspaper article that a house in which they held a second mortgage in Moraga, California, had been seized. The Sheldons had been forced to sell the house a few years earlier when Carl broke his back and was forced to retire. The man to whom they sold their house had been charged with running a prostitution ring. When the house was seized, it was valued at $325,000, and most of the equity was held by the Sheldons. Income from the house and Mary's job as a secretary was their only source of support. The person the Sheldons sold their house to ran several legitimate businesses, and the Sheldons had no reason to suspect he was involved in any criminal activity. The legitimate businesses probably served as places where he could launder the funds from his illegitimate business. But anyway, the seizure of their house for the alleged crimes of another person began a 10-year ordeal for the Sheldons. While in the government's care, the Sheldons' home was nearly destroyed by water damage and vandalism. The Sheldons discovered they couldn't foreclose against the federal government, and they had to go to court repeatedly to get authorities to keep up the mortgage payments. As a result of their continued battles with the U.S. government and fear of destitution, Mary was treated for depression, and their 10-year-old daughter developed borderline ulcer. The Sheldons were lucky. They found a good attorney and were willing to fight, and eventually got their house back after it was nearly destroyed from neglect and water damage, and after they had incurred tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. So far, it looks like there are a lot of people that aren't criminals that are being prosecuted under these RICO statutes, and a lot of them are just because someone else is using their property and they themselves are not involved in any way. And there's no way, gosh, I mean, the federal government can't even keep illegal drugs out of federal prisons. How do they expect people to, to be able to just live a normal life without having some kind of incidental contact with people who are doing illegal activities? And how illegal are those activities? I mean, Personally, I don't think that people should be prohibited from putting certain things into their body. It's kind of their body, their choice. And if it's kind of a precedent you don't really want to set, because once the government has the authority to tell you what you cannot put in your body, it kind of infers that they have the ability to force you to take things that they want you to take. That they have control over what goes in and doesn't go into your body, and that is a really dangerous outcome. They've already shown that they have the power to force us to buy health insurance, although a lot of people didn't. I think that I mean when you get this total fascist system going that we've started, and you have a huge giant conglomerate that kind of feeds the politicians in that 10 square miles in Washington D.C., and they tell them, oh, we need to have a law that forces people to take to eat this consume this food because it's good for the health. It's going to cut medical costs. When really just the opposite happens. And we're going to have them put statin drugs in the water because it's going to lower everybody's cholesterol. And we've just found out recently statin drugs are things that they're causing steadily increasing and almost alarming rates of Alzheimer's. They're responsible for dramatic rise in heart disease. They are responsible for just deterioration of mental, emotional, and psychological health in much of our population because they're destroying cholesterol, which is a building block for your muscles. So your heart is the major muscle in your body. They also destroy cholesterol, which is the building block component from that vitamin D is made out of when sunlight hits your skin. And they cause Alzheimer's because cholesterol is the major component of the substance myelin, which makes up 70 to 80% of a person's brain. So if you don't think this can get worse, that this is as bad as it's going to get, I tell you, you're the same people that thought that there was nothing wrong in 1970 when they passed this bill. And you can look back and say, those people are stupid. How did they ever get us in this position? Well, if you're not doing something about it right now, if you're not out there, marching up and down the streets and saying the RICO acts must go, if you're not asking questions at political rallies, when someone like our dumb representative from the 2nd Congressional District of Oregon, Greg Walden, who studied under that, he's just one of the guys that is like the guy that goes out there and makes sure they have enough votes for everything. That's what his position is in the Congress. And so he's a real GOP guy. He does whatever he's done. He was voted by almost every publication out there that ranks congressman as the least conservative congressman in the Congress. And I got to tell you, the 2nd Congressional District is a pretty conservative district, and how he continues to be reelected is just beyond my imagination. But he is really an empty suit. You ask him a question like this, and he'll get this blank look in his eyes, and he'll, what's the thing I'm supposed to say about that? But no one told me what to say. This show wasn't supposed to be a hit piece on Representative Walden. It's about the RICO statutes and how they need to be repealed. They're unconstitutional. I don't care what good they thought they were going to do. They haven't prevented organized crime from flourishing. Organized crime has decided to go into the government, and they run the CIA now. The CIA is bringing all the drugs and stuff into this country. And I think they wanted to get rid of all the organized crime people so the CIA wouldn't have any competition. And I'm not saying that all the people in organized crime were good people or they were people we should look up to. They certainly. I'm saying that their actions were not as bad as the actions that the government is using now. They didn't just. Maybe they did do this, but they didn't do it with. At that time, there were people in law enforcement that were actually trying to prevent them from doing those things. They were trying to protect people's property. Now they just take it. So I want you to know that if and when your property is ever seized, all the rules and procedures that are out there are made to make it easy for government and almost impossible for you. The trials are always in government courts. They're not independent mediators. There's generally it's a judge who, if he makes a ruling that the government doesn't like, his career is over and he knows it. So he just kind of rubber stamps things. And they kind of feed him the information that he can use to justify or rationalize his decisions. And if he makes a bad one, they'll just appeal the decision and get a different judge and go on. I mean, you have to, and I think 20 years ago when some of these cases I'm reading about were on there were still some decent people in Congress. Those people are mostly gone now. There were still some people and I still think there are some good people in government, but those people weren't afraid to speak up then. Now they are. They're not gonna stand up for you. This story was written in 1993, I believe. The one I was reading these things from. And he says, there is some reason for hope. Representative John Conyers of Michigan. Yeah, the John Conyers. That was, yeah, they had to resign in disgrace. Yeah, that guy. He was holding congressional hearings on civil asset forfeiture. Yes, they're holding hearings. Great. California Anti-Forfeiture Coalition, led by FEAR, Forfeiture Endangers American Rights, successfully prevented 2 new draconian asset forfeiture bills from passing. So they at least had stopped it for a while. That doesn't mean that it's going forward. But it's, wait a minute here. That isn't the only thing that happened or has happened. This is, again, back in the 1990s. A drug task force composed of Los Angeles police, sheriff's deputies, DEA men, and National Park personnel and National Guard troops burst into the home of Donald Scott and shot him dead. The agents said that they had come looking for marijuana but found none. The raiders' real motive was different. The federal government had been attempting to acquire Scott's 200-acre ranch as part of his expansion plans for the Santa Monica Mountain National Recreation Area. But Scott, wealthy heir to a European chemical fortune, refused to sell. Then some officials decided to make an offer Scott could not refuse. After the raid and killing, Scott's lawyer, Nick Gutsu, charged that the motive of the raid was to seize the ranch under federal forfeiture laws, which allow property to be confiscated even before a defendant is convicted. Police vigorously denied the charges, which many considered outlandish until now. On March 30th of that year, that would be the following year, Ventura County District Attorney Michael Bradbury released a report which said that the drug investigations were motivated at least in part by desire to seize and forfeit the ranch for the federal government. The raiders used an invalid search warrants based on false and misleading information. In fact, shortly before the raid, Border Patrol agents twice searched the property for marijuana and found none. It turns out that Scott was staunchly anti-drug and regularly combed his property for plants which others may have placed there. And these stories, I remember reading the story when it happened. This was when I was starting to become active on the internet and chat forums and such. I remember reading that and saying, this couldn't be, and we began to become outraged, and I was, as anybody would be. That's just how can people in a civilized society stand for something like this? Anyway, I want to fast forward to current time. Let's see. I got my notes kind of messed up here, so just bear with me for a second while I get into some new stuff here. As I said earlier, the total amount of property that is forfeited to the government, and this isn't just the federal government, it's federal government, state governments, county governments, city governments, park services, whatever. It's whatever form of government has any kind of authority, they can enact these RICO statutes to confiscate property, and they don't need a real reason. They can make something up, get a judge to give them a warrant, and go after it, and just take it, and say, "Well, you'll get your stuff back if you're not convicted." Well, how are you going to defend yourself without any money? Yeah, good luck with that public defender. Okay, on December 21st, 2015, that's just a couple weeks ago, M. Kendall Day, Chief of the Asset Forfeiture and Money Laundering Section of the United States Department of Justice. I actually think that is the name of the section. At least they admit that they're crooks. Issued a letter of notice that payments from the Equitable Sharing Program were deferred after Congress rescinded a combined $1.2 billion from the program. In other words, they're taking so much property that's worth so much money that Congress decided that they didn't need to fund this program anymore. It could be self-funding through the assets that they seize. Now, if that doesn't send shivers down, now this was just a couple weeks ago. If that doesn't send shivers down your spine, I don't know what will. It means that it's over $1 billion a year as well. I'll just read from this thing. I think I lost the page I was looking for. So, with the rescission of $1.2 billion from the program funds, that was what Congress had axed out of it. The net position of the fund would be roughly $1.3 billion. The fiscal year 2014 audit also notes the annual costs facing the agent's asset forfeiture program were $1.775 billion. So not only are they seizing about over $1 billion in assets, but it's costing them $700 million more than they're seizing. This seems like a lose-lose proposition. So what are they going to do? They're going to go out there and seize a little bit more. Seizures are going to go up because they have to pay for this program on their own because Congress cut $1.2 billion out of their budget that was supposed to help pay for this. They estimate they're going to need to seize a little over $3 billion. These costs, in order to pay all their costs, these costs include the cost of seizing. You got to always consider the cost of seizing. The cost of evaluating, it has to be appraised. Those people don't work for nothing, The cost of inventorying, we've got to build warehouses. We have to, keep it out of the weather if we're going to get our top dollar for this stuff. Maintaining it, if they have a house or something, we have to make sure that we don't do what happened to those, that couple I read about earlier with the house, $300,000 house was almost demolished because of water damage and neglect. We can't be having that. Protecting, it goes along with that. Advertising, they have to, and when they're going to sell it, they have to advertise. They aren't going to put these ads on the TV as a public service. Forfeiting, there's court costs, lawyers, expensive, and disposing of the property seized for forfeiture. There's some of the stuff they just got to throw away. It's just junk. I don't know why we even took it. It wasn't worth anything. Just a bunch of family pictures and stuff. I don't know, why did we take that? I don't know. Okay. These costs are necessary to support the asset forfeiture program, and they fluctuate in direct relation to the forfeiture activity levels and of investigative, prosecutive, litigative, and administrative participants of the fund. Oh my word, we are in deep, deep kimchi. So, down the road, we could be expecting more and more activity in the asset forfeiture program because we're heading into a recession. There's going to be a economic slowdown. And they're not going to stand well for having their budgets cut, so people are going to be encouraged. I can't wait to you're going to hear more of this see something, say something rhetoric going on the airwaves, and I want to get more leads to help prevent a crime, and that's going to be that is going to be something. No, see, and then here we go. With that, there is some bright hope out there. There are some more sensible heads. Are saying, "Hey, this is out of control. This is doing the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do." And there's a lesson here that's true all the time. That any time you use force and coercion to accomplish your means, you're going to get the exact opposite result that you set out to achieve. It happens over and over and over again. We have compulsory education. We have the stupidest people on the planet. I don't mean stupidest people. We have we have truancy laws. We have compulsory education. We have the lowest, or I'd say the most underachieving students in the industrialized world. We finish at the bottom on an annual basis in terms of educational performance. So much for all this, the money and the truancy laws and everything else. So it isn't just in this case, it's in every case. So Michigan is going to make law enforcement agencies report more details of their asset forfeiture programs, making it a bit harder for them to keep property they confiscate from residents. Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it, but at least they're giving positive rhetoric to this problem, and maybe even maybe someday I don't know. I think what they're doing is they're raising the expenses of law enforcement agencies, so it's going to require more shakedowns, more asset forfeitures in order to pay for all the record keeping they're going to be forced to keep. But I'll give them a D- instead of an F, because at least they realize it's a problem. Using government to solve the problem seems a bit short-sighted. That's the same kind of thinking that has brought them to this point in time. Right now, is that we're using the government to solve problems that government creates, and they just create more problems. And it's this isn't a story or my worldview. It's the truth. It's the fact. It's what happens every time, every single time. Sometimes we don't even. We're not made aware of it because we have propaganda instead of news in this country. It's really hard to find the truth about anything. You can't go to any kind of mainstream news organization. They're all on the take. And if they start to spout the truth, they get a call from the people in charge. And it might be, let's say that a drug company is making a drug that's killing hundreds of thousands of people a year, like maybe a lot of these antidepressants. Let's say, I'm not going to name one because I don't want to get sued, but let's just say one of those antidepressants, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they're causing just massive deaths. There's probably at least 100,000 deaths a year on these, and there's a number of deaths from marijuana, I believe, we're still holding at zero, and yet that's illegal. So if you start to report on something like this, the drug company that's making a fortune on these drugs, well, they put in their little complaint to the appropriate government official, who then leans on this reporter. At the same time, they tell the television networks that if they don't do something about this program, then they're not going to be receiving any advertising revenues. And the FDA, they get all over their case, threaten them to, that they're going to give them, you aren't qualified to make your opinions known on these issues. You don't have any research to back this up. This is, defamation and da-da-da-da-da, and this is a legally approved drug and da-da-da-da. So it's, we never find the truth out. There are a few brave people out there that stand up and they say something like a British doctor that started to blow the whistle on the vaccinations, thinking that there may be a link between the way they were doing the vaccinations and autism. And for standing up and taking a stand. He had his medical license revoked. He could no longer practice medicine, and all he wanted to do was, instead of compounding the vaccinations and having 8 shots in one, he wanted to have it as 8 separate shots spaced with 3 to 6 months in between, so they wouldn't overdose the children with substances that can cause the autism. They get into the brain. Boys are a little bit weaker than girls. Girls have a stronger blood-brain barrier than boys, and so it was affecting males much higher percentage than females. But it was affecting women too, girls, young girls, and his whole career, his whole livelihood was taken from him because he had the courage to stand up and say something. So there's a lot of people that have guts, and yet, when I talk to some of the people who I consider to be pretty bright people or very open-minded and thoroughly research stuff, they go out and start to research this case, and they find the propaganda that's been put out against him, because they do a real thorough job of just destroying someone's they destroy their character, with all sorts of stories about them that may or may not be true. I mean, some people probably have some skeletons in their closet, whatever. Anyway, it's hard to know what is the truth when you have to rely on a third party for the information. You're pretty sure the third party is they're controlled by the people that you're worried about. Would we believe what we read and heard about the mafia if we for sure knew that the mafia controlled the news organizations, that the news organizations were constantly running stories about how benevolent and kind and what a plus for society they were? A lot of people would probably believe that. And the people that would say, "Hey, this isn't true," pow. I guess I better keep my mouth shut, because George stood up and said something and they shot him. I think I'll just be quiet. And so that's how it happens. And I want you to know that despite the fact that Michigan was trying to do something to kind of stem the tide there with civil forfeiture legislation, in California they had a bipartisan asset forfeiture reform bill that was introduced, and it couldn't get enough votes to come to a vote. In other words, it was introduced, but it was not allowed to come to the floor for a vote because there wasn't enough interest in it. And this despite the fact that 76% of California likely voters think that police should not be allowed to seize and permanently take away property from people who have not been convicted of a crime. So I think if you wanted to run for election to a state office in California, I think this would be a wedge issue that you could probably defeat anybody out there. In fact, Dennis Linthicum, if you're listening to the program tonight, and if you're going to be running against Greg Walden, I think you should pin him down on this. I think Greg Walden's vulnerable here on this issue. I think he's for that drug, those RICO statutes. We have to keep these organized criminal organizations from getting off the hook, because they have all this money that they've obtained illicitly, and they are able to hire these really good lawyers, and they're always getting off. And so we have to prevent that from happening by removing all their assets that they have before they go to trial. And so, has any of that ever happened? No, they've never used it against those guys because they're scared shitless of those guys. It may have happened to one or two. They use it mainly against law-abiding people who haven't done anything wrong and who they could never convict of a crime, and they use it just to get the money. So what's the real crime that's happening? Where's the real property being taken from people? Is it from the criminal organizations and the mafia? Which I don't think the mafia is a good organization at all, but it certainly doesn't look as bad as the government that's taking everybody's personal property. their private property, their assets, and they're taking them without a warrant, without they're just taking them on suspicion. There's no indictment, there's no trial. They're not even charged with anything. They just take them because of a suspicion. You might be doing something wrong. And then later they can't find they did anything wrong, but they won't give them the money back. They won't give them their house back. They didn't give that guy his yacht back. It went to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said in an 8-1 decision that he should have taken more care in who he rented his yacht to. These people have shit for brains. Okay. I'm calm now. But I think that I think this is something that should be brought for. I mean, I'm hoping that there's more than just a few people here in Southern Oregon that listen to this show, that there's people all across the United States that hear it from time to time, or maybe if there's somebody in Colorado, you can share it with people, and somebody in Nebraska can do the same, and somebody in Texas, and we can get this word out that this is an issue that we have to stop this right away. This is going to turn into a third world banana republic very quickly if we don't. And I've spoken out many, many times, so I think that the United States isn't maybe the freest place in the world to live, but I think now it's getting questionable as to whether it's even in the top 100 places to live, countries to live. Certainly, there are pockets of kind of how it used to be. But if you travel much or whatever, you're kind of putting yourself at risk every time you step out of your security zone, your little place where you're known to people, and you get out there where you're a stranger, and these people that are in these positions of power have no soul, they have no conscience, they are criminals. They go into that work because they can get away with it in that line of work. And it's just like pedophiles go into the church to work with children. Criminals go into the government to steal from people. It's kind of the same thing. I still have about 10 minutes left before the music starts, and I'm running out of stuff, so I'm going to cover a few current events that are going on right now. This is January 7th, and on Monday of this week, the Hammonds that were unconstitutionally tried twice for the same offense and sentenced to 5-year terms for setting a backfire on a lightning-caused fire that was threatening their home and the corrals, their livestock, their whatever. And this backfire that they sent was they set this without the authority of the government. I'm sure that at like 8 o'clock at night, they tried to call the BLM offices and found out they were closed. And, what is someone to do except to take on the responsibility and fight the fire themselves? But that was against the law to do that. Well, it'd be they had a choice. They could die in a fire, or they could try and save their home. So, by the way, this fire consumed less than an acre of land, put out the other fire, which could have done much, much more damage. And according to, it also burned up a bunch of unwanted invasive species that had come into the area and actually increased the value of the property, did less than $100 worth of damage. And for this, they were called terrorists. And this is one of the great injustices of our time. The Hammonds, to their, I don't know if it's their credit or they're just scared shitless. People have alluded to the fact that their lives have been threatened, and I think they're just rolling over and saying it's not worth it. They love their family too much to fight this. They don't want to lose any of them. But I tell you, this is a different kind of asset forfeiture. This is an asset forfeiture where the government wants that land, and so they're just making it impossible for these people to make a living. And they're driving them off the land by throwing the book at them for any kind of problem they had. And the first judge in this case said that according to the law, he had to convict them because they had broken a law, but he thought that the law was, and the guy, I don't know, these guys, they don't teach them the Constitution in law school anymore or what, but it definitely was an unconstitutional law. It was a violation of their Fifth Amendment rights. It's cruel and unusual punishment. And he realized all that, and so he said, I just sentenced. He gave him a very minimal sentence, which they served and came back to work. The government people could not. Oh, that just infuriated them. They just couldn't stand that, and so they got another judge, and they came back after him again for the same offense, which is double jeopardy, which is also unconstitutional. You're protected. It's a natural right. You can't be charged twice for the same crime. They can't keep charging you with a crime with a crime until they get a conviction. If they don't have the evidence the first time and you're innocent, that's it. So, the two Hammond family members reported to authorities and are now incarcerated in prison for 5 more years. And they'll never be able to fly on a plane because they're convicted terrorists. Yes, they're called terrorists. They won't be able to own a firearm because we can't let terrorists have firearms. Do you see where this all goes? And if we don't stand up for these people, and I'm not saying that what the Bundys are doing over there by occupying the national refuge is the right action to take, because I think when you go out there and you have a mob of people that you can't control, and someone in that mob fires the first shot, all of a sudden you've lost the moral high ground. Right now we have the moral high ground, and we could be protesting in front of every BLM office in this country. Free the Hammonds, free the Hammonds, free the Hammonds, free the Hammonds. It should be the battle cry across this nation. And it should be peaceful protests, because you don't accomplish anything through force and coercion. You just get the opposite of what you're setting out to accomplish. It even happens when you're individuals trying to do that. Yeah, you might have to use some force to defend yourself, but you should never be the first strike. You always have to occupy that moral high ground, and you're only using defensive force. And that's what's important in this. And the government doesn't do that. They try and egg you on. They try and incite violence, and they use the force of government and courts and people with guns pointed at your head to make you do what they want. Excuse me. And this is something. If they can take these people's ranch, they can take any piece of and right now I just gave you evidence of these people. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people in this country who have had assets seized by the government under these RICO statutes. If you don't believe it can't happen to you, you haven't been listening for the last 45 minutes. What's happening to the Hammonds could happen to every single person in this country. They can take everything you have. And all they need is suspicion of a crime. And they can go in and just wipe you out. This is something that cannot be allowed to stand. And it's a tragedy. It makes me really sad because I love my country, but I hate my government. I think these people are the most despicable people on the face of the earth. And while there may be some good people in government, and I know that they're afraid to stand up, and I'm not sure I'd be brave enough to stand up, I urge you, if you know someone like that you tell them, says, man, can't you find some other kind of work? Let's get the good people out of government, get them on our side. If you happen to be someone who owns a business and you have a place for a person that, you could use somebody who's an honest person with a lot of integrity. It's a freedom person, a liberty type person. Find a place for them to work. Help them make sure they never fall too far if they lose their job because they stand up and try and be a whistleblower and get canned. And let's try and make it so that it's a little bit safer for people to speak out against the injustice that goes on in this country. And let's do it through positive means by helping them with any means you can. We can have legal defense funds. We can have we can have all sorts of things. We can start, we can continue to post things. Now, right now, on our Double Cross Facebook page, there's just a Stefan Molyneux analysis of the Hammond situation, and he just did an amazing job on it. We have a timeline of events that have happened that was I got from Elaine Smith out there in Eastern Oregon, and it's a fabulous breakdown of all the things that have happened and how much good the ranchers were doing in that area to keep the ecological diversity healthy and sustained, and how the migrating birds would all flock to all the ranches, and they avoided this wildlife refuge because it's so poorly managed by the BLM. They've actually almost destroyed it, that area. Those, I really recommend both of those two. The Stefan Molyneux thing is about 50 minutes long, and the article that is written, the timeline about what's happened out there, that'll probably take, it took me about 25 minutes to read it. Those are both, will really inform you about what's going on there. And I want you to know, as you're listening to Stefan or you're reading that other long article, remember that the only difference between them and you is the spelling of the name. I mean, that you are going to be a target eventually. We're all going to be put in stack and pack 200 square foot apartments, tiny houses. So they can maximize the amount of revenue they can extort from us, because of land use laws and zoning. They have to, have all these really tiny, tiny places to live in. We'll just be packed in there like sardines. We'll look like the little cubicles on the Matrix. And that is the goal for humanity. For Agenda 21, the government taking over and providing for us all. It's all wrapped up in that same hideous plan, and they're trying to enact it. And 20 years ago, I started screaming about this stuff, and not much has happened since then. But I think there's a few more people screaming about it now than there was then. So it gives me some hope. But I might be screaming about it from Mexico in the near future. I tell you, it's if it gets much worse, I'm not sticking around to see the end of this. So I'll see you next week, folks. Next week we're going to have a follow-up on this, and frequent guest Eric Dubin has been doing some research on this as well, and he's going to come in and give his viewpoints on this issue. So tune in next week for more about this. Bye-bye for now.
One more time.
They're putting this big happy face on it. Look at how wonderful.